Welcome to Wikipedia in the Classroom. And this is going to be basically a discussion. I don't want to lecture or to make you feel like this is something that you have to do. This is just food for thought as we think about how Wikipedia has changed over time and how it will constantly be evolving as we move into a more digital future, probably for the foreseeable future. So just a couple questions. Do you use Wikipedia in your class currently? And then how do you use Wikipedia in your class currently if you actually do so? Oh, great. Okay. Okay. Yes. My mom is a music teacher and she often uses Wikipedia. And I think that Wikipedia is very useful when you're trying to combine multimedia. And so that can be very useful. So what has been your experience as an educator? What have you seen? Do you think that students trust Wikipedia? How do you think they feel about it? Okay, so you've seen it get better and grow, more information and more sources.
And I can unmute. I just was eating this for a moment.
Yeah.
So I was typing. But yes, I've seen it grow, and we do research a little bit, but what's neat is that there's just more information on small things, like in my case for my classes, not just a musician, but on specific songs. And that's been easy, like a launching point for them, because sometimes it's very hard to find information on specific songs, as in who the musicians are and what year it was recorded and what different recordings there are. And there have been some nice pages with reputable sources. So, yeah.
That's a really great point. And Stephanie, you bring up a great point. They trust it, but you're still unsure if it's reliable. One of the things that research has shown is that students actually doubt the reliability of Wikipedia. So many of them will say, oh, it's not as trustworthy as a different source. And some studies have found that that has to do with perceived notions of reliability and credibility. When it comes to their previous instructors, their instructors might say, no way, you can't use it, absolutely not. And then other instructors may say, yes, you can use it for background information, but only background information. So it really is a matter of what the instructor has kind of said to the students that can shape their perception. Students still are not sure if they even trust Wikipedia. On the whole, I'm sure there are some individual students that are like, yeah, I love this, but it might not be across the board as trustworthy for students as we might think. So is it worthwhile to try to revise students' perceptions? What are some of the consequences of telling students not to trust Wikipedia? Are there any consequences? I guess that would be a better question.
Ah, sorry. I think that I didn't realize I was unmuted still, that they start trusting any source that's not Wikipedia, and that's not necessarily a great thing either. Um, they don't question when they go to websites like Song Facts for me and personally, or things that have some quick information when it isn't necessarily better. So I try to tell them, what to do on Wikipedia, how to check if it's, where the Wikipedia page got it. But also, I wonder, has Wikipedia gotten more secure or more selective in what content they publish?
That's a great question. And we will probably talk about that towards the end. But if that question isn't fully answered, let me know and we'll see if we can develop a good kind of consensus on it.
But I think it is important to try and revise their perception so that they're kind of being critical thinkers about any information that they're finding digitally, and not just singling out Wikipedia.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot of information out there not to trust. So Wikipedia is not any worse or better than other online content that they might find. The other thing I might think about when I think about revising student perception of Wikipedia is, first and foremost, when we think about lateral reading, which is reading across the web to do fact checking, Wikipedia is recommended as one of the top sources to just fact check small little details or basic concepts and ideas. So it seems a bit strange to tell students not to use it, but then to trust it for fact checking. And then the other thing is, if let's say that students are researching who to vote for next, or what kind of organization they want to trust or attend, or just doing some basic research about things that are happening in the world around them. One of the things that might be important to emphasize is that Wikipedia might be one of the first places that they go. And so if they don't trust it, they can't trust the experience that they're having online, which is not necessarily a positive thing. So the typical question that we ask is Wikipedia credible? And I want to expand some of the things that we think about when we ask those questions by asking a different set of questions. What does this source do? So what does the Wikipedia entry do? What purpose does it serve? How does it contribute to the larger conversation? And what do you or do the students want to do with the source? I think those questions can kind of help us figure out if this source is maybe useful and trustworthy and applicable at this point, or if it needs to be saved or maybe not used at all. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more, and I'll show you an example of what I mean when I say this. So here's just a quick history of Wikipedia. I want to kind of give you an overview of how it became what it is today. So January 2001, founded by Jimmy Wales and Larry Sanger. It first began as Nupedia, which didn't really take off, but the whole idea was to have scholars editing and peer reviewing these entries. But what they really found was that scholars didn't really want to work for free. Scholars did not want to spend all their peer review process time on something that was freely available. But the whole point with Wikipedia was that information was freely available and wasn't used to advertise to you and wasn't used with a paywall or blocking of content. There actually has been some offshoots of this. Citicidium and Scholarpedia kind of have this, they're basically the same thing as Wikipedia, but scholars actually create them. The main difference is that they have very, very few entries in comparison with Wikipedia. I think Richard Cook talks about Scholarpedia, and I believe it only has about 2,000 entries or something like that, whereas Wikipedia is far outpacing that. So the first style manual, so Wikipedia has its own style manual, that came out in 2002. 2005, there was a study done comparing Britannica versus Wikipedia, and that study was actually done by Nature, the academic journal Nature. And what they found was that Britannica and Wikipedia made the same number of mistakes, or about the same number. I think for every entry there was for every few entries there was maybe 3 mistakes from Britannica versus 4 mistakes with Wikipedia, which is not that great of a difference when you think about how they're produced. And the other thing is that Wikipedia is constantly evolving, whereas Britannica, it pretty much stays the same. Once you start creating entries, then you want to start using those entries because it really loses its value over time. The SJ controversy, that was basically this guy that had been online doing all these entries for religious content. He posed as a scholar in the field, and they found out that his credentials didn't really match up with what he was saying. So one of the things that people commented on was that it really undermined the credibility of Wikipedia, which it was working towards. So 2009, Wikipedia crashes. I'm sure it has crashed other times, but this was pretty significant because it crashed when Michael Jackson died. And everybody was trying to edit Wikipedia at the same time. It's also the same year that it falls under Creative Commons. 2015, the articles in English Wikipedia number over 5 million. 2017, it's 5th for global internet engagement. It falls to 8th in 2020, and then in 2021, it's 13th. That's still not bad. It's still the top 100 and the top 50, but you can see that it's declining in engagement, which I think is interesting because it's actually getting more credible. And as it's gotten more credible, it seems to be losing global internet engagement. I can't tell you why that is. I don't know, but there may be some. I'm sure there's going to be a study on that, and I'm sure that would be very interesting. So Richard Cook, who is a tech writer, basically says that more than an encyclopedia, Wikipedia has become a community, a library, constitution, an experiment, a political manifesto, the closest thing there is to an online public square. And that is a pretty bold statement, but it helps us to understand, I think, Wikipedia as this very evolving, engaging space that is not going to be perfect because there are multiple people with their hands in the pot. But that doesn't make it any more or less valuable. It just does something different than what a scholarly article does. So the editing policy, I think this is probably the things that we are thinking about when we think about how people edit. So the Wikipedia editing policy is here, what you can and can't edit, and how you can do that. This is the process of how to edit on Wikipedia. If your students are interested, these slides should be available pretty soon. And you are welcome if you want to try playing with it and have your students edit content, you can definitely do that. And then the protection policy for the Wikipedia pages. I'm going to show you that in a minute, actually. So here's how to edit a Wikipedia page from the Harvard Library and then writing your first article on Wikipedia. I have a resource at the end of the presentation about teaching with Wikipedia, but this resource might be helpful if you ask your students to revise or edit an entry. They can be a little bit more informed about how to do that. This is mostly something I want to show you as well because there are expectations and standards. I think there is a persistent notion that Wikipedia, it's just a free-for-all. You just go in and start editing stuff. There's no rules. It's just the wild, wild west out there. But in reality, it's a lot more complex than that. There's a policy that goes along with how you can edit and what you can edit. There's also a guide for the appropriate ways to style the writing and style your citations. So there are rules in place for how you can edit. We'll click on that editing policy just to kind of give you a glance. Here's how information can be added. You can try to fix problems, paraphrasing, things, but it can be removed or challenged by the administrators or by other users. And then there are problems that might be helpful to address. So, for example, vandalism should be completely removed, and other people will keep others in check. So someone vandalizes a page, that might happen, and it might be up there for a few minutes, but someone's going to come along and fix that. One of the interesting things that they found about Wikipedia is that the more it's edited, the more accurate it is. So if you see a page that's undergoing edits over time, it actually means that it's just getting, it can mean it's just getting better. Of course, there are always exceptions to the rule, but it can be very useful in having other people consistently go over these projects and these entries to get better and better and more informed as we go and as the entry develops. Okay, so looking for the signs. There are some indicators that a Wikipedia page is, if we're thinking credible, then would pass that credibility test a little bit more than maybe other articles at certain times. So I'm going to show you some indicators. There is a lock at the top right-hand corner. I'm going to show you on Barack Obama's. So not every Wikipedia page has a lock button. For example, there is, I'll look up, a Labrador Retriever. You'll see here there is a Wikipedia page for that particular breed of dog. There is no lock button here up at the top. This is something that people could edit and change and revise as they see fit. There's that edit button, free to edit as I would like. However, for Barack Obama's page, you will see that the edit button isn't here beside early life and career. There is a lock button up here at the right-hand corner. This is where the lock buttons will be. And when you click on that, you can see the limits to what you can and can't edit. So this page is semi-protected. And what that basically means is they can't be edited by unregistered users. So in order for you to change anything on this page, you actually have to register for an account. And then that kind of puts a name to a face, meaning if you're consistently vandalizing pages, then that becomes something that is brought to the attention of the administrators because they can see your account and they can see your name. This is something that is very useful when we think about somewhat controversial or maybe popular individuals at a certain time. So during certain political seasons, a politician's page may be semi-locked or may be locked just to administrators. It just depends on the context. And this is actually the Wikipedia protection page that you will see here. Whoops, let me go back really quick. This is the protection policy. So that's what I'm showing you now. You will see all the different color locks, and if that page is locked, it will have one of these locks on the page. So you have fully protected, like a gold lock, so only admins can change it. So if you're looking at a gold locked page, then you can say that that is a little bit more credible than maybe something that doesn't have a lock on it at all. Does that make sense? You might also see a disclaimer. And they will often look like this. So it'll tell you what kind of page it is. It'll tell you what this purpose this page serves. But then it'll maybe say this page needs to be updated. The reason is, and then it'll give you some information. And then it may link to some more specific content that may be more relevant to what you're looking for. One thing I would say about this is that if there's an event happening, let's say we think about a candidate for office who has just won a political seat. Maybe they've won a nomination or they have actually won the office itself. That will have a bar at the top. Their page will have a bar at the top that says, this page is currently being heavily edited for these following reasons. So be aware that what you're looking at may not necessarily be correct right now, maybe updated, maybe under the revision process, something along those lines. So if your students find a page that looks like this, and you see this little banner at the top, that gives them some context for what they're looking at, but also if this is something that they should maybe cite in their work or not. And then citations. I'm sure you have seen the citations that say that a citation is needed. If a claim is made, right beside or after that claim, there will be a blue box that says, or a blue link in brackets that says citation needed. So if a student wants to cite something from there, if it says citation needed, that indicates that maybe there's a little bit more work that can be done on this page. So again, it's all about context. So if there's a certain lock on the page, if there's a disclaimer at the top, or if there's citations that are needed, or if the citations are really good, then that can help to determine if that's an article that you might want to cite or that your student might want to cite. And here is a good example. There are good articles. Has anybody heard of a good article on Wikipedia? Like, is the actual category? Has anybody heard of that? Okay, you have. Great. Perfect. So I'm going to show you on Alexander Hamilton's page. Right up here, there is a green plus button. This indicates what a good article is. And it'll tell you this is a good article and here are the following reasons. And then it'll give you the criteria. And I've actually linked the criteria in the slides. So if you are interested in those slides, I'm actually going to drop the link into the chat for you right now. And you are welcome to use these slides how you see fit. There you go. That link is in the chat. So this criteria tells you how a good article comes to be a good article. It doesn't have copyright violations, it's well written, it's broad in coverage, it's neutral, it's often illustrated or has multimedia aspects to it. What cannot be a good article, and then it tells you what can't be a good article and how these things get nominated. So there's actually a process. Is it like peer review? Not exactly, but there is a review process for a good article. So it can't, there is no randomness to making a good article. So I can't just nominate a page and just say, yeah, it's a good article. I have to actually take it through a process. And you can see if you wanted to explore recently listed good articles. And then if you were interested in a particular topic, let's click on music, for example. It will tell you some of the things that pass the good article review, and it's got it listed as albums, classical compositions, songs, other musical articles. So if you wanted to narrow your search, this can be useful. So this is kind of what I was bringing up at the beginning that I wanted to highlight or emphasize about asking different questions when we think about these articles. So when we think about the Alexander Hamilton article, and we think, okay, we want the student, let's say, to write about the legacy of Alexander Hamilton, particularly doing something with the Federal Reserve. Does that student need to go and get a scholarly article to talk about the Federal Reserve and Alexander Hamilton? That really is up to the instructor. The instructor really gets to decide. But this Wikipedia entry, it passes the good article standard. It's semi-locked. It has all the features of a really credible source. If a student wants to, maybe they're ready to challenge the notion of Alexander Hamilton and his impact on the Federal Reserve. They're just like, I'm going to rock the world of these historians. And I just can't wait. That's not necessarily what the source does. What the source does is give an overview of how Alexander Hamilton impacted his life, and then also how he impacted American government and democracy. So the purpose of the source and what the source does don't match up with what the student wants to do with the information. So maybe this isn't the best article for the student to use. Maybe that is a time to go get a secondary source that is scholarly and peer-reviewed. However, if a student just wants to talk about the effects or the relationship that Alexander Hamilton has with the Federal Reserve, maybe this is a good source because the source is being informative and the source is just there to highlight some of his activities. So now the source and its purpose match what the student wants to do with that source. Does that mean that you would allow it in the classroom? Not necessarily, but it gives that student some flexibility. Do they need a scholarly source at this particular point? How does it fit within the larger narrative and context of what they're working on? Or would a Wikipedia article that passes the criteria of a trustworthy source, but also a source that is much more nuanced than just being credible, does that mean that they can use it? That's just one of those lingering questions that instructors will have to decide for themselves. But if you knew that that source was out there and you were going to have a student write about that, do you think that you would allow them to use the Wikipedia article rather than a scholarly source if their purpose matches the purpose of the source? Great. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that there are some possible solutions. If you're just like, I'm not convinced, I don't think, yeah, oh, that's great for your students and your own research. That's great. If you're like, I'm not convinced, that's totally fine, because at the end of the day, it's whatever works for you as an instructor and whatever works for your students. So you can compare and contrast a Wikipedia article with a library reference entry. You might also complement a Wikipedia article with another source. That I think is fairly common. In a lot of the research that I read, these are two approaches that people use quite often. Acknowledge context, purpose, and insight. So that's what I was referring to with those questions. Expanding beyond, is it credible, to what purpose does it serve? How does it work? What does my student want to do with it? You can also use the archived version of the page. It benefits students and you. So for example, you're like, I really want I will allow my student to use this Wikipedia entry, but I really want to be able to see what they're seeing. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So you're looking at Barack Obama's page, and your student is citing from this entry. If you want to see what they are seeing, and you want to make sure that, say, for example, I don't know, some person goes in and they have registered for their account, everything's, you know, going fine and dandy, but they decide they're going to vandalize the page. That doesn't happen, as far as I can tell, very often, but it can still happen. The thing the student can do is when they're citing the work, they can come up here to view history. And when they click on that, it's going to be up here on the top right. They can look at, here's the revisions that it has undergone. And notice here, reverting possible vandalism. So this person has fixed this entry and has updated it in some way. But you can click on the link, basically the revision, the entry that you're looking at. And that gives you the archived page. And so this link up here is what students would use when they cite it in their work. Now you can go back and look exactly at what students are looking at. So even if the page gets vandalized or changes or updates, and the information that they're citing is somehow different, if they've given you the archived version, then you can always go back and compare that with the information that you see and what they see. Does that make sense? Great. And then here's a source I'm going to show you right here. Here's a website. I'm also going to drop it in the chat there. This is just a site that will help you to teach with Wikipedia if you want to. So it kind of works through student editors and users explaining how you can incorporate it. And there's lots of things to explore. You can learn more about this project. You can join some of these course offerings, or you can ask for expertise and give you a little bit more advice and guidance on how you might use this if that's something that you are interested in. Okay. So I think there are some lingering, persistent questions that we might still be left with. So what makes an expert? A lot of the people that are editing Wikipedia do not have doctorates. Most of them do have bachelor's degrees, but there's no guarantee that they are like super well educated in the field. But one of the things that's really interesting about Wikipedia for me in particular is when we think about expert, do we associate it with being trained, you know, through a traditional education system, or being just really passionate about this particular topic and reading as much as you can about it? And then how does our framework for knowledge impact how we view Wikipedia? How does that make us more or less likely to trust it? I don't have an answer for that question. Everybody's going to have a different answer to that question, but that might help us to think about why we view Wikipedia in certain ways and how we might approach incorporating it into a classroom. Okay, again, you're like, not so fast, I'm not going to have Wikipedia in my class. Or you're like, yeah, I'll have Wikipedia in my class, but I'm not sure how I'll use it. These are some reference databases. Credo Reference, ProQuest, and Academic OneFile are probably the most useful in this particular context. They can serve the purpose of what Wikipedia might serve if you're not ready to incorporate it into your class. You can also look at the databases under general articles for reference, and I'll show you how to do that now. So if I go to the CCCC website, Let's see if it'll give us access there. There's your library tab. Click right on there. Your databases. And then there's lots of different ways that you can find it, but I would recommend going find by subject. And then general articles and references right there. Drop-down menu is going to present you with a variety of reference sources that you might consider using if you are not ready to join the Wikipedia train, which totally makes sense. I get it. I know people feel hesitant, and that's okay. If you also are a little hesitant and you're just not, I'm not sure where to start with library resources, you're also welcome to contact me, and we can talk about library resources, and we can talk about Wikipedia, and we can just figure out what might work for you and what might work again for your students. There's my contact information. And then if you would like to leave feedback about this particular presentation, I will share that link with you as well. And those are my references. So I shared the slides with you. So if you are interested in accessing those materials, they are there for you to access or look up. Does anybody have any questions about Wikipedia or about how you might use it or how you feel about it or anything you want to share? Oh, great. Well, I'm so glad. Thank you. Yes, Wikipedia has gotten more credible over time, that's for sure. And I will just drop that link for feedback into the chat. And you don't have to fill it out now if you don't want to. You're welcome to do that whenever works best for you. Thank you so much for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to stick around, or if you want to chat about library resources, happy to do that too. Oh, thank you. Yes,